We are thrilled to welcome into the Mountaineer Locker Room then and now Hall of Fame kicker, former kicker for WVU, Mr. Paul Woodside was there from 81 to 84. I'm going to go ahead and read the accolades before we get started so we don't have to take up the whole show with all these things that made him a star at WVU. The highest accuracy in school history, 80%. Most consecutive field goals made, 15. Longest kicks made, 55 yards. He played at Falls Church, Virginia High. He was a WVU walk-on in 1981. He set the then national record in 1982 of 25 field goals in a season. Still holds the highest field goal percentage for field goals, 40 yards, 23 for 23, 100%, and still holds the most field goals, converting at least two in a single game, which is 10 games. And I know people my age, and this was, and I'll go ahead and tell this, Paul. Had just graduated college in 80, started in college in 81, same time you were there, and that's when I really got involved watching Mountaineer football because I was at Glenville. We made the trips pretty frequently to go to the games, and I'll never forget. I was one of the 55, 60,000 people yelling Woody, 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 whenever you came into the games. And as fans, we knew when you came in, it was almost automatic. There's no question about it. But before we get to your career at WVU, we want to thank you for being here, first of all. And then I want to get into like your high school days. You know, you're not a real big guy stature wise. What was it like in high school? Tell us about your high school days and then how you ended up heading to Morgantown.
Difficult to describe it 40 years backwards in time, but it was high school. High school was fun, but when you're in high school, you don't really recognize or appreciate it for what it is. These are the kind of feelings or gifts or sentimentality that hits you kind of later in life because when you're in it, you can't really appreciate it to the extent. So I my high school team was good, but around in the our area, Fairfax County, only four teams made the playoffs at the time. We never made the playoffs. So you're always on the outside looking in, but you love what you're doing, you love your teammates, you love your school, but that's the extent of it. So I have always had a love of place kicking, and but again, you're ignorant to the process of how things work. So back in the day, if my memory holds correct, alumni of the schools could contact the football offices and they could actually do some recruiting or make mention of athletes that they saw at a game. And so a couple of the games that we played, I remember some people that spoke of WVU, so on and so forth. And I didn't, again, I'm ignorant of the process. Then there was one day, December of 1980, Gary Tranquil came to the school and introduced himself. I, again, did not understand anything of the process. And um, I originally was either going to go to Arkansas, Alabama, but then WVU was in the area, brand new coach, brand new stadium. And as God would have it, that's where I was. That's where I went.
So when you arrived at WVU, I mean Falls Church. If I'm sure a lot of the people that are watching are familiar with Falls Church, Virginia, but when you arrived at in Morgantown at WVU, you've been kicking on the high school level. You walked on. What was that experience like? I mean, it had to be little bit overwhelming, I would think, with the size of the place and the magnitude of everything, that you'd done in high school, magnified 10 times. I'm sure that was somewhat overwhelming.
It's you can look back now and see that because I train place kickers and I have a number of them at different schools and they've walked on, they've earned scholarships. At the time, you could actually have an open tryout. So, as it was, I have a sister that lives in Western Pennsylvania, and I came down. I tried out on August the 8th. I did not know where I was going to go to school. I was really nervous of speaking more than place kicking, if you will. And there was the whole story behind that with Donnie Young and with Coach Nealon. Went out on the field and was the stadium, the size of the stadium, being in that moment didn't unnerve me. I guess I was too excited, not nervous. And so that part of it, because I'd spent so many years by myself kicking, so therefore the environment that you step in with the kicking, it doesn't really affect you as much because you're used to the wilderness. If that makes some sense, that the nerves aren't the issue. The issue is when you're trying too hard, not to please them, but to please yourself. And so after I got a couple of place kicks on the field and was nervous, but then I started to hit some nice kicks. They recognized, hey, this kid might have some potential. And so it was, like I said, it was August the 8th, and literally came to school. I didn't realize, again, I use the word ignorant a lot because it applies. My mom drove me back down to school on August the 11th, but I didn't realize it was going to be permanent. So she left me up there, had to drive back to Falls Church about 3.5 hours, get my belongings, then drive all the way back up to give them to me, then drive home. So I had the easy part, and she was up for about 2 days straight. And the opening game I'll never forget was at UVA Scott Stadium. I believe it was August 31st, 1981. I was still 17 years old. We beat UVA at UVA and didn't understand everything that it meant, which is actually a great thing. And then it was a wonderful year and went to the Peach Bowl that fall, and the rest is history.
So when you were there, when you were there doing the kicking on the field, you mentioned, um, after that occurred, did the coaches say, come on back, walk on, whatever the case may be? What I don't know when you got scholarship, but did they just invite you at that point to become a walk on?
They, I guess, after I left the field that day, they had a staff meeting and different coaches spoke with each other, and I don't think they did anything on the spot. They spoke with each other about it and then extended me the invitation to come back, and I did, without any belongings. But so it was a comedy of errors, if you will, which is just a real testimony to Coach Nealon, Coach Young, Coach Battershell, Coach Dunlap, Coach Tranquil, on and on it goes. Just a great, great, stable men, and the players love to play for them.
Yeah.
So,
Mike, you want to jump in there and ask a few questions? I know you had a few.
Yeah, well, Paul, of course, you were one of my heroes when I was growing up. And I happened to talk to a couple of your friends today.
Uh-oh.
And before I tell those stories, I want to ask you if you remember the one summer we worked together on the state road in Morgantown. And we come across that small school up on top of this mountain, and the kids were kicking a soccer ball. And you said, "Let me see that." And when you kicked it, it went over the mountain. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Then you, it was a long way to go get that ball.
it was. There are certain memories you try to forget, but yes.
Let me read to you what Bill Legg had to say about you. Uh, he says, first off, one of the best human beings I've ever had the privilege to know. Secondly, when I first met Paul, without saying a word, he handed me a card explaining he stuttered. 4 years later, he spoke eloquently, and we had a hard time getting him to stop talking. So that was from Bill Legg, who was your snapper, in case people don't know.
Absolutely.
And I talked to another guy today named Tim Agee, who was your holder. And Tim echoed the same things. He also said he referenced the pit game, the 16-13 pit game,
Yes.
where your field goal fell 2 inches short.
Yes.
And he kind of thought he might to be part of the blame for that he might not have had the right pressure, he might not have had the right tilt. Several scenarios he brought up, and
Absolutely.
but Tim's a great guy.
Yes.
And he also mentioned that you and him and Bill would go out to dinner on Sundays.
Had this thing Monday nights getting pizza, and it would be either at Bill's place or Tim's place, and just to spend, I can assure you, hands down, beyond any doubt whatsoever, you would not be talking to me had it not been for them. And I can get into the specifics of their skills, but they made my job so easy, it was almost comical because they were so good at what they did. It's I laugh because it's to the point you can finish each other's sentences. Where someone has a headache and the other takes aspirin, someone's thirsty, the other gets water. That they were so phenomenal that it just made my job so much easier.
And Paul, I don't recall, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall a bad snap or a bad hold.
No, absolutely not. There were no high snaps. There were none in the ground. Absolutely not. And that's why I said, whether it's pit, that miss, that was all on me. There's the expression, you don't know what you don't know. And in hindsight, as I train place kickers now, it was my training that was off. I was just, my focus was the result and not the process. And so I didn't train correctly, but there was never a bad snap. There was never a bad hold. And I'll give you one specific. Now at the college level, I guess they're back 8 yards from the line of scrimmage. And we were at 6 3/4. Bill was so good at what he did when the ball was spinning as it was going back to the holder, the laces would be right in Tim's hands, so he never had to spin the ball.
Wow.
No, I cannot, having trained kickers in the NFL, college level, high school level, you don't realize how absolutely phenomenal these guys were. That everything is measured by operation time, and the operation time, what they're looking for is about 1.3 seconds on average. I had some operation times around, I think the best one I ever had was 0.98. And my average was about 1.1. And that's on them. That's on them. They're
Incredible.
absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I want to bring up one more point, Greg. When Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but when you were a kicker, for one, they still use the T,
The block, yes, sir.
the block. And second of all, the yard markers were spread.
Hash marks.
The upright was wider and the hash marks. And on top of that, as a sidebar, we had the old AstroTurf.
Oh my gosh.
And there was a crown on the field. Our stadium in Morgantown, if you're standing on one sideline looking over at the other, I'm sorry, you could not see from the thigh down. There was that much of an arc in the field.
Yeah.
So
when you were from the wide hash, you're
kicking uphill. Yeah. So but again, you can learn to alter everything accordingly.
Well, like I say, you were certainly one of my as a young fan, and then a Mountaineer. I can remember you running during summer practice when the guys were practicing. You ran 40 miles or 10 miles one day, 40 laps on the grass field.
Either that or run the stadium stairs or Law Center Hill. It looked good, but what it did is it actually burned my legs out. And I didn't realize that at the time. So,
yeah, they, of course, Daryl Talley and I are great friends, and they make light of you on the kickoff team, running down and breaking down, ready to make the tackle. But you were all in, Paul, and you deserve everything you got there. You're a great guy, just like Bill said. I called Coach Nealon hoping to get a quote from him, but he didn't get back to me yet. But everybody that I know thinks the world of you, buddy.
Well, that's all glory goes to God. But like I said, it was everybody there, yourself included, the fans. There's, again, 40 years later, when you're in it, you can't appreciate it for what it is, but you can look back and you can just see. And every time I come back to WVU or I come back to the state, the people are so solid. They're so caring, and it's always home. It's always home. And so when we're playing a home game there, we feed off the energy of the fans, but we want to give the fans what they deserve from what they give to us. So it's that reciprocity. And that's what, again, with Coach Nealon, everything. That's why as soon as he got there, as he has said many times, it was home. It was home. And he had, I'm sure, plenty of offers to go elsewhere, but he wanted to stay there. And his legacy for the game last year, when he was having his name in the stadium where it should have been a long time ago, but he had a phenomenal program, phenomenal staff, and he made it easy on all of us.
But you guys were a great team, man. Again, I know quite a few of you, and you're all solid.
Paul, I want to ask you a question. You're talking about training kickers. When you look at these kickers today, I mean, it's amazing when you watch a college football game or a pro game. I mean, those guys are kicking, 55, 60 yards, just like it's nothing. And I'm curious. I know everybody is bigger, stronger, faster, all those type of things.
Sure.
But is there anything, technique wise or anything different that kickers today do that were different from when you were kicking as far as training is concerned?
You're going to train when Rich Rodriguez was the head coach, and he had a strength coach named Mike Barwis, who was actually training, from my understanding, injured vets in Michigan. He went with Rich up to Michigan, but the way that he trained was very unique. And this is where you have your Noel Devine, Pat White, Amos Airway, where the speed is the speed, the explosion, the quickness is just so incredible that when they played Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, and it was on the order of going to be a lock of the year, like when they played Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl. And people would look down on WVU going, oh my goodness, this is going to be easy. We can win this game with one hand tied behind our back. But it's the athleticism, it's the athlete, and the training for explosiveness and quickness. And so when you're talking about place kicking, I didn't learn how to kick until 10 years after I left WVU. I would kick with my leg, and these guys are kicking with their hips, their core, their back. And that's how I train the athletes now. That's the biggest difference, where the Patriots kicker that went to Virginia Tech, and I've known since high school, I can see these guys. I mean, I've seen these guys kick 75-yard field goals, as you said a second ago, like it's nothing. And it's the ability to accelerate through the ball, not just to it, but through it. And you're altering your hold to however you want the ball flight to be. The last thing you're doing is just kicking a ball. You can alter the ball flight, the rotation, you can do anything. And that's how it's literally expanded in the past 30 years.
It is pretty amazing to witness today. I tell you, it's something to watch when you. I mean, they 40-yard field goal, to most people look at it and say that's nothing. These guys just go out there and boom it away, and
Sure.
then they get back 60, 65 yards, and they're knocking them through. It just keeps going up every year. When before we get off here, want to hear about your time after WVU. I know one of the things Frank and I have talked about numerous times, and all the former Mountaineers we've talked to. One of the things that we marvel at are the accomplishments and things that you do afterwards. You're talking about training kickers now. I mean, you're the same age as me, and I can't imagine training anybody to do anything other than to get the recliner in the right position. But tell us about your time after you graduated from WU. What transpired in your life after that?
Married an absolute beautiful woman from Charleston, West Virginia.
Awesome.
Named Teresa, and we have been what will be married 40 years this coming September.
Awesome.
We moved down here. She is an author, a painter, a creator. I have worked with UPS, but my passion, if you will, when they talk about Tom Landry, and you talk about the coaching tree, if you will, all of the same thing with Nick Saban, all the ones that have gone out from there. So a way to pay tribute and pay thanks and honor, you could say, of Don Nealon is to pay it forward. And so been able to have trained a number of place kickers and punters that have gone to WVU and Ohio State and Notre Dame, and I don't want to say Pitt, but yes, Pitt, Virginia Tech. I mean, just all over the place, because it was such a wonderful time in my life, and it actually breathed life into me. And so when I'm training, I have a session tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. with a high school kid around here. When I'm training the athlete now, I know what they're thinking, I know what they're feeling. And Coach Nealon was a great leader, And yes, he was the head coach. He was a leader. He wasn't our friend. He could be friendly and he would laugh and joke with us, but there was that line that he was the head coach. He was the leader. But because he was a great quarterback in his own right, so he understood the skill or the skills or the athletes, the athletics, the games, the preparation as a player, and then that made him a better coach for it. And so it's that same attention to detail. I'll give, again, I can't talk about this without talking about Coach Nealon. And it's a little side thing. He said in a meeting one time, if you see a piece of paper on the ground, pick it up and throw it in the trash. And to this day, I do it. I've been in other major programs' locker rooms through the years, and you can see how lazy it's a mess. And he because with Coach Nealon, he was a man of order, and so everything he did was ordered and orderly, and so he passed that on to the players. And you don't see that at every program.
Right.
And you know, Paul, I've not to interrupt you, but several players have made the same comment about picking up the paper.
Yes.
And do you remember when we used to go through training table and we would thank the cook and best meal we ever had? If you couldn't choke it down, you still told her it was the best meal you ever had. And I still do that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So
Absolutely.
It's funny that you're one of many players that have told this story about picking up paper.
Yes, there's obviously that, but then, of course, if I didn't mention with Coach Nealon, the Mountaineer and the well, and he tells that story and just fighting his way out of that well to get that pit panther and then putting his hand around his neck. So, yes.
Yeah, and you know, Coach Nealon, I talk to him about once a week.
Okay, awesome.
And it's funny you mentioned, you're right, he was not our friend. But now we are friends.
Amen.
And it's a great opportunity. I enjoy talking to him. He's very candid.
Yes.
And you know, as honest as the day is long, as you know.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, he is and he helps Paul, as you know, anything that we ask him to do, he will help.
Yes.
You know, Greg has an event coming up December 12th to help a veterans shelter. And
Sure.
we've got Coach Nealon. He's like, you know, let me know what you need to do.
Sure.
So just that kind of guy.
Yes, sir. And that's
and
what you want to emulate. Absolutely.
Hey, Paul, one more quick question before we sign off. Looking back on your kicking career, what's can you give me one or two that stand out in your mind as maybe not the longest or anything like that, but the most exciting or the biggest one you ever kicked?
As I said earlier, when you're in the middle of it, you can't understand it or appreciate it. And when I say, and I don't say this with an empty spirit, but when I can say the hand of God being on something, is the hand of God on everything? Absolutely, yes. But the week of the Penn State game in 1984, I had rolled my ankle so bad, the ligaments that hold the ankle, there was 5 tendons, I guess was what was explained. I basically had one left. And I was trying to strengthen my ankle, but that entire week I did not practice. And then for the rest of that year, including the bowl game, which you know you're getting old when the stadiums that you played in don't exist anymore. They had to tie my ankle up so tight that your foot's hurting. But it was the Penn State game, and I believe they had Rodney Menas kick off. Because when he kicked off, the ball was gone, but he got nervous, kicked out off, I don't know, out of bounds or something, and then I came in. And so we had a 49-yard field goal. It's the best kick that you ever have as a place kicker aren't the ones that you're trying to kick the hardest. And the ball went through the upright and it was still climbing because I again, I don't have the big stature, but I'm very adrenaline oriented, and I would pace the sidelines the entire game. But that was one that, knowing the history of the week, that I could have very easily not been playing, but wasn't going to miss it. And it was just one of the perfect kicks. Yes, the guys these days can hit from 70 and it doesn't mean anything. But it was that kick at that moment, at that time, under those conditions. And I remember after the game, when it was obviously a zoo, running over to the Penn State sideline and just telling the guys on their team, we love you. And they weren't wanting to be the team that lost after 29 years. But that's how it played out. And it was you could say a big kick at a big time, and each one has its value. But the backstory to that game was the training staff was phenomenal to get me on that field. But then you can just really feel the hand of God. What Hostetler said at Oklahoma, that they didn't know what to expect of us or what to expect of him because they had no film. And they got out to a 14-0 lead. And then lo and behold, as the game ended, and the great experience after that game was hearing E. Gordon Gee screaming so loud in our locker room because we didn't know what to expect. But we didn't know we should lose. And that was the biggest thing. So every kick was good, but it was just that one at that moment because the backstory was there. So
I got you. Awesome. I'll tell you what, it's been a blast. And I know just like Mike said, remember it so well, you playing, and you were, somebody we all loved and looked up to. And I always thought, I don't know if it was your stature or what, but everybody just, it loves you. Everybody loved Woody. And I was one of them right there in the crowd cheering for you. And it was a lot of fun. And you were an awesome kicker and great representative of WU. We really do appreciate you taking the time tonight to get with us. Mike, anything you want to say in closing?
The thing that, when you think about Paul Woodside, is that he's not only was a great football player, he's a great man. He's a man of faith. He's a man of a 40-year marriage. He's the guy you want your daughter to bring home and your son to grow up to be like.
Yeah.
And I truly mean that.
All glory goes to God. But like I said, thank you so much, because without you all, it just, like I said, it would not have happened. So much appreciated.
All right. Well, we appreciate you again for taking some time to be with us. We'll get back and do this another day, and another time we'll do it again. We look forward to that. And again, we thank you so very much. Paul Woodside, everybody.